What do corporate social responsibility and intellectual property rights have to do with one another? It seems like maybe nothing, but actually more than you think. We tend to think about corporate social responsibility in relation to oil spills and things that are obvious human rights violations, but it's broader than that, and I'm going to talk today about how CSR and IP overlap and how I think this is going to actually be a continuing trend, which is actually not a bad thing and can be seen in a pretty exciting way. So first of all, what is CSR? What is corporate social responsibility, and where does this idea come from? Typically in international law, countries take on obligations, not private entities. That means human rights obligations and human rights violations are obligations and violations for which states, countries are responsible. And the CSR framework, the idea of corporate social responsibility, is that these private actors should also have some responsibility, take responsibility. And it's not like a legal mandatory obligation. A lot of them are voluntary codes. But the idea being that corporations will take responsibility to respect human rights, and that when they engage in anything that violates human rights, they should remedy as well. This is important because we have a lot of multinational corporations that have a lot more money and a lot more resources than some countries, which is perhaps surprising to some of you, perhaps not. So if you have corporations that have a lot of resources and they're the ones acting across borders, does it make sense to only hold countries responsible when the corporations might be the ones that are the actors and the ones that have the resources? What does this look like when we're talking about IP and CSR? CSR within an IP framework would at least, at a minimum, create an moral obligation on IP owners to manage their IP in ways that are socially responsible. What does that mean? Well, we recently saw with the COVID-19 crisis a demand that the companies that were producing vaccines make sure that their patent rights weren't interfering with people's need to access the medications. Now, I know that's a complicated story because obviously the companies want to recover the investment, much of which was public, but the need to recover what they've invested in developing these vaccines. So I'm not saying it's a free-for-all, but there's the public health interest, and public health or health as a human right, and to what extent can the companies manage their IP in a way that facilitates that? Or we could think about the example where there was a dispute between the Australian government and tobacco industry, and Philip Morris took the lead there. And in that case, the Australian government wanted to have plain packaging so trademarks wouldn't show on cigarette packages. What would show instead were awful, really scary looking pictures of the negative health effects. And the question there was, well, what about the trademark rights? Can we show our trademarks instead of having these horrible pictures? So maybe a compromise in that situation, or managing the IP in a socially responsible way, would mean having the trademarks be very small as opposed to be as prominent as one might like, and have the pictures still showing. You can understand, and I can understand, why the cigarette companies wouldn't want to do that, because of course it's not great for business, but the public health interest there, the human rights in public health, the right to health, the interest there was to make sure that people knew if they were smoking what that was actually going to do to them. And there's no health benefits that we're aware of to smoking. Companies didn't fare so well at the end of the day, and I think, they came off looking a little worse than if they had tried to perhaps find some sort of other happy middle ground, because they later moved to e-cigarettes as the more sort of less harmful, socially responsible approach to smoking. So in a nutshell, CSR, we can think of CSR and IP and how IP owners can manage their IP in a way that respect human rights, that promote human rights, that benefit the population. And contrary to what some people think, I don't believe that IP and human rights, or IP and corporate social responsibility, are at a loggerheads. I think there are creative ways to figure out how to make IP more socially responsible. And this conversation has already started, and it's going to continue. And I think that's really exciting. Join me at Jotkulture for more conversations about socially responsible IP, cultural heritage, intangible cultural knowledge, and traditional knowledge, cultural expressions.